evening, friends, and welcome to another segment of The Unknown Presidents. This is David Warren, your host. And tonight, our president will be the 14th President of the United States. Franklin Pierce, who served from 1853 to 1857. To give you some interesting information on President Pierce, I will turn the program over to Captain Magoo Longstreet. Captain, tell us all about Franklin Pierce.
Thank you there, Chief. Well now, mateys, Franklin Pierce was one of my favorite presidents, or at least one of my favorite unknown presidents. The poor fella, he had a somewhat unfortunate life. Lots of mishaps occurred along the way. But he was an affable fella. Everybody liked him. He had lots of friends. His best friend, in fact, was writer Nathaniel Hawthorne. Roomed with Nathaniel Hawthorne during his college days at Bowdoin College up in Maine. He also fought in the Mexican War and made a general over a brigade. But the poor fella had the unfortunate luck of leading a group of men in a battle when a cannon salvo burst forth, which frightened General Pierce's horse and threw the poor man up against the saddle pommel, which hit him right straight in the groin. Not a fatal wound by any means, but it hurt like the dickens. And General Pierce passed out for just a few minutes, also injuring his knee. When he regained consciousness, he was determined to get back on his horse. But by then the battle had gone on, and one of the men that came to his rescue yelled out to another officer to carry forth the battle that Franklin Pierce was unable to. And the man didn't hear the reason and thought that General Pierce was a coward and began to spread the word that General Pierce is a coward and we must go on without him. But he recovered, and despite his great pain in his private area and the injury to his knee, he mounted another horse and continued on into battle. Franklin Pierce was married to a very sickly, somewhat sad lady named Jane Appleton Pierce. They had 2 children to die as infants, but they did have one that grew up by the name of Benny, or at least he grew up into childhood. However, as was the case, the tragedy was nowhere near over with. Franklin Pierce was elected president and took the oath of office in 1853, the only president to affirm and not swear in the oath. But the story preceding his inauguration was a very tragic one. He boarded a train with his wife Jane and his son Benny, stopping at various towns along the way, visiting them before the inauguration. They went up to a small town called Andover, Massachusetts, and there they stayed for a while. Franklin Pierce had to stay a few more days in order to attend the funeral of a friend, and his family waited for him. On the morning of January 6, 1853, President and Mrs. Pierce and young son Benny left on the morning train from Andover, Massachusetts. Scarcely 1 mile down the track, the train jumped the track. The car carrying the president, his wife, and young son overturned and slid down an embankment. The president and Mrs. Pierce were unharmed, but young Benny was killed right before their eyes. The 4 years that President Pierce was president was a very dark time for he and his wife Jane.
In fact, Jane never came down for any social functions. She secluded herself into a room up on the second floor of the White House. And there she would write letters to her dead son, Benny, in great mourning. The one thing that President Pierce did accomplish was getting a nice little piece of real estate for the United States in the southern part of Arizona and New Mexico, called the Gadsden Purchase, which made way for the Transcontinental Railroad. A very good addition to the United States. But because he supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, it led to much bloodshed in Kansas as citizens from the state of Missouri crossed over to vote for slavery, to make that a slave state. Much fighting broke out, and it became known as Bleeding Kansas. Tensions got great in Congress, too. So great that this man, Representative Preston Brooks, and Senator Charles Sumner got into a wee bit of an altercation in Congress when Preston Brooks attacked and beat Charles Sumner about the head with a cane. But because of President Pierce's great unpopularity, he did not win in the election of 1856. And retired to his home up in Concord, New Hampshire. He remained somewhat active in politics and still with his friends. And then in 1863, his wife Jane died, and President Pierce felt like that his whole world had come to an end, and the man just simply literally drank himself to death. He had had problems with alcohol some years before, and now with the death of his wife Jane and feeling like that he had nothing left, he just dove into the bottle. And President Pierce died a few years later in the year 1869. A man who perhaps if personal circumstances had treated him better, he might have become a great president. But of course that's something we shall never know. But anyway, that's my story of Franklin Pierce. Thank you very much, Captain. Good presentation. And I might also add that, as you may remember, a little over a year ago, my friend Raylene and I had the honor of visiting the grave of President Pierce and his wife Jane and young son Benny when we made a trip into Concord, New Hampshire. Raylene and I are in Concord, New Hampshire at the gravesite of our 14th president, Franklin Pierce. Served one term from 1853 to 1857. Had somewhat of a tragic term in office. His young son Benny was killed in a train derailment. The president and his wife walked away from unscathed right before he took office. And anyway, here he lies. It was a trip, a visit that I shall never forget. Well, that is all for tonight, my friends. Stay tuned for another chapter of The Unknown Presidents later in the week. Until then, this is David Warren. Back to you, Wolf.